The emergency landing pod groaned and hissed as it cut through the frigid atmosphere. Inside, Ambassador Talia Nix clutched the safety harness, her violet eyes wide with terror. The diplomatic vessel she'd been traveling on had suffered catastrophic damage in an asteroid field, and now she, the sole survivor, plummeted toward an uncharted planet's surface. "Brace for impact," the automated system warned, its synthetic voice eerily calm. Talia's four-fingered hands tightened around the straps. As a cerulean from the Lystra system, she'd been raised in warmth and light. The approaching planet, with its endless white terrain, represented everything she feared. The landing was violent. Metal screamed against ice, and Talia's head slammed against the pod wall. When she regained consciousness, the cold had already begun seeping through the fractured hull. The pod's systems flickered and died. Only emergency lights remained, casting an eerie glow on her blue-tinged skin. "Situation assessment," she muttered, falling back on diplomatic protocol to keep panic at bay. "Resources, minimal. Temperature, life-threatening. Injuries." She winced as she touched the gash on her forehead. Significant. The pod's emergency kit contained little: a thermal blanket, basic medical supplies, and a half-charged locator beacon. She activated the beacon, knowing the chances of rescue were slim this far from established routes. Survival training had never been a priority for diplomats. Talia had spent her career in climate-controlled chambers negotiating treaties, not fighting against nature. Still, she wrapped the thermal blanket around her shoulders and stepped out into the howling wind. The landscape stretched endlessly white in all directions. Her breath crystallized immediately, and the wind cut through her ceremonial robes like knives. The temperature would kill her within hours. She trudged forward, following the beacon's weak signal, indicating a power source several kilometers away. Each step became heavier as the cold invaded her body. Ceruleans weren't built for this. Their homeworld circled twin suns, and their metabolism required constant warmth. By the time she spotted the smoke rising in the distance, Talia was stumbling, more than walking. Her fingers had turned a dangerous deep blue, and her thoughts were becoming sluggish. The structure ahead, a wooden cabin with a metal roof, represented her only chance at survival. With the last of her strength, she reached the door and collapsed against it. Her knuckles barely made a sound as she knocked, but somehow the door swung open. A human male stood before her, tall and broad-shouldered, with a thick beard and startled eyes. He wore simple thermal clothing and held a projectile weapon loosely at his side. "Please," Talia whispered, her translator struggling to function in the cold. "Help." The man hesitated only a moment before pulling her inside. The sudden warmth was almost painful against her frozen skin. "You're cerulean," he said, his voice deep and rough from disuse. "You're a long way from the diplomatic zones." "My ship," she managed, shivering violently, "crashed." "I'm Ethan," he said, setting aside his weapon and wrapping another blanket around her. "Former Earth Coalition commander. Now just a man who wants to be left alone." As warmth slowly returned to her limbs, Talia's diplomatic training took over. She assessed her situation, alone, vulnerable, dependent on a stranger. On her world, there would be protocols, exchanges, formal arrangements. She began, steeling herself. "I can offer compensation for shelter, my body if you wish it." Ethan's face hardened. He stepped back, creating distance between them. "That's not how things work here," he said firmly. "You need medical attention, food, and rest. No exchanges necessary." The refusal should have been a relief, but instead it unsettled her. In her experience, all interactions had costs and benefits, carefully negotiated. Unilateral assistance without expectation of return was foreign. Suspicious even. "Why would you help me?" she asked as he guided her to sit near the fire. Ethan's eyes, gray like the winter sky, reflected old pain. "Because out here, humanity is all we have, even when it comes in different colors." 3 days had passed since Talia had collapsed at Ethan's doorstep. The snow continued to fall outside, piling higher against the cabin windows, while inside a delicate dance of caution played out between the unlikely pair. Talia sat upright in the small guest bed, observing the human as he changed the bandage on her leg. His touch was clinical, efficient, betraying his military background. "The wound is healing well," Ethan said, not meeting her eyes. "Your species recovers quickly." "Ceruleans evolved with rapid tissue regeneration," Talia replied automatically, as if delivering a diplomatic briefing. "It compensates for our poor cold tolerance." She winced as he applied a salve to the gash. Since her arrival, she'd categorized every item he'd provided: 3 meals daily, medical supplies, clothing adapted for her slimmer frame, and shelter from the killing cold. The debt accumulated in her mind, a growing ledger that made her increasingly uncomfortable. "You've depleted significant resources caring for me," she stated, her violet eyes following his movements. "I must insist on establishing terms for repayment." Ethan paused, his weathered hands hovering over her bandage. "Not everything has a price tag, Ambassador. Everything has value. That's universal." The diplomatic corps had drilled this into her. Relationships between species functioned on balanced exchanges. Uneven power dynamics bred resentment and eventual conflict. "I cannot remain indebted," Ethan sighed, finishing his work before standing. The cabin's main room was modest but functional. A fireplace, kitchen area, and living space merged into one. Various equipment and supplies lined the walls, suggesting long-term isolation. "If you want to contribute, you can help with daily tasks when you're stronger," he said, turning away to stoke the fire. "But you're not a prisoner or a servant here. You're a guest." The concept unsettled her. In Cerulean culture, guest was a temporary status quickly formalized into a proper relationship category: ally, asset, or adversary. That evening, while Ethan prepared a simple meal, Talia noticed a wooden box tucked beneath a shelf. Military insignia decorated its surface. Medals, she realized. Curiosity overrode propriety, and she reached for it. "Don't." His voice cut through the room, sharper than she'd heard before. Talia retracted her hand immediately. "I apologize for the breach of protocol." Something flickered across his face, perhaps recognition of the formal phrasing that served as her emotional shield. "No protocol here," he said more softly. "Just private memories." The meal passed in silence, but afterward, as the howling wind intensified outside, Ethan unexpectedly spoke. "I led a battalion during the frontier conflicts. 4 years on the edge of known space." He stared into his cup. "Lost most of my people to a mission that shouldn't have happened." Talia recognized the offering, a piece of himself to balance their interaction. "I was lead negotiator during the Proxima Treaty," she responded carefully. "When it collapsed, 3 worlds blamed Cerulean diplomacy. My reputation suffered." Something shifted between them that night. The first foundation of trust laid, not through formal exchange, but through shared vulnerability. When Talia woke, screaming from nightmares of her crash, Ethan was there, steady and undemanding. When his hands trembled while cleaning his hunting rifle, Talia pretended not to notice, preserving his dignity. By the week's end, Talia had memorized his routine. The way he checked the perimeter at dawn, how he maintained his equipment with meticulous care, his habit of staring into the distance while drinking his morning beverage. "Your people," Ethan asked one evening, "will they search for you?" "Eventually," she replied. "Diplomatic vessels carry tracking systems, but in these conditions—" She gestured toward the storm outside. "It could be months." He nodded, and she caught something in his expression. Not disappointment that she would leave, but perhaps relief that it wouldn't be soon. That night, reaching for a container on a high shelf, Talia lost her balance. Ethan moved quickly, catching her, before she
fell.
For a moment, they remained suspended in the contact, her cooler skin against his warmth, his hands steady on her waist. "Thank you," she whispered, suddenly aware of how long it had been since she'd been touched with kindness rather than diplomatic. "Formality." He stepped back, clearing his throat. "You're stronger today, but don't push too hard." Talia nodded, but as she watched him return to his tasks, she realized a dangerous truth. The ledger in her mind had begun to track not just what she owed him for survival, but something more complex and frightening, the growing value of his presence itself. "That's it," Ethan announced, staring at the communications equipment. "We're officially cut off." Outside, the storm had transformed from constant snowfall to a raging blizzard. Ice particles battered the cabin windows like tiny bullets, and the wind howled with almost sentient fury. "How long will it last?" Talia asked, standing beside him at the window. 3 days, maybe 4. These polar depressions can stall over the mountain range. Talia absorbed this information with outward calm, though inwardly. The prospect of such prolonged confinement stirred anxiety. The cabin, while adequate, suddenly seemed smaller. Until now, Ethan had maintained a careful distance, often spending hours outside checking traps or gathering supplies. That buffer would no longer exist. They settled into new routines. Ethan taught Talia to play Earth card games, while she demonstrated cerulean meditation techniques that helped conserve body heat. The diplomatic formalities she'd clung to began to wear thin as hours stretched into days. On the second night, as they sat before the fire, Ethan opened a cabinet and retrieved a bottle of amber liquid. "What is that?" Talia asked. "Whiskey. Old. Earth tradition for cold nights." He poured 2 small glasses. "It might affect you differently, cerulean physiology and all." "I've had human alcohol during diplomatic functions," she said, accepting the glass, "though never in such intimate circumstances." The word hung between them. Ethan's eyes flickered to hers, then away. The whiskey warmed her from within, loosening the tight control she maintained over her thoughts and words. After her second small glass, Talia found herself speaking of things she rarely shared. "My mission was a failure before the crash," she admitted. "I was being recalled in disgrace." Ethan watched her, firelight reflecting in his grey eyes. "What happened?" "I advocated for a peaceful solution with the Voran Collective when my government wanted military posturing." Her fingers tightened around the glass. "They called me naive, removed me from service. The crash merely completed my fall from grace." "You chose what you thought was right over what was expected," Ethan said quietly. "That takes courage or foolishness." She looked up at him. "And you? Why does a decorated commander hide on a frozen planet at the edge of nowhere?" The silence stretched so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I refused an order." His voice was low, almost lost beneath the howling wind. "We were told to bombard a settlement harboring suspected insurgents. I knew there were families there, children." His hands clenched. "My refusal came too late. Another commander took over. 300 civilians died." Talia moved closer, the diplomatic distance between them diminishing. "You tried to prevent it." "Not hard enough." He drained his glass. "Sometimes I hear them at night, the voices of people I never met." Without thinking, Talia reached out, her 4-fingered hand covering his 5-fingered one. The physical differences between their species seemed trivial compared to their shared understanding of moral weight. "I hear the screams from my crash every night," she confessed. "The crew members I couldn't save." Ethan turned his hand beneath hers, their fingers intertwining. The contact sent warmth spreading up her arm that had nothing to do with the whiskey. That night, they fell asleep beside the fire, not touching except for their hands, still loosely joined. When Talia woke shivering from another nightmare, she found Ethan already awake, watching her with concern. "Cold?" he asked. Ceruleans need more warmth than humans, she admitted. Without a word, he shifted closer, draping an extra blanket around them both. The heat of his body beside hers was like a sun after endless night. Talia tensed initially, then gradually relaxed. Against him. "Is this acceptable?" he asked, his voice rough with something more than sleep. "Yes," she whispered, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart. "This is acceptable." As the storm raged outside, something equally powerful and unpredictable was brewing within the cabin's walls and within their hearts. Talia found herself studying his features when he wasn't looking. The scar along his jaw, the flecks of silver in his beard, the way his stern expression softened when he thought she wasn't watching. By the third day of their confinement, the atmosphere had changed. Each accidental touch lingered longer. Conversations flowed more freely, punctuated by moments of charged silence. They were no longer merely survivor and rescuer. They were becoming something neither had vocabulary for, something that transcended species and circumstance, something that terrified and thrilled them both. The blizzard finally relented, leaving behind a transformed landscape glittering with ice. Ethan ventured out to check his equipment and clear paths around the cabin, while Talia, against his advice, insisted on helping. "You've been confined too long," she said, wrapping herself in the thermal gear he'd modified for her. "I understand the psychological effects of isolation." Ethan raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. Outside, the cold bit at Talia's exposed skin, despite the protective clothing. Her breath formed clouds in the frigid air as she followed Ethan through the snow. "Your communication array," she said, pointing to a structure half buried in snow. "With modifications, it might reach frequencies compatible with cerulean emergency bands." Ethan glanced at her. "You want to contact your people?" The question held more weight than its simple words suggested. Talia hesitated. "It would be prudent to inform them of my survival," she said carefully. "But there's no urgency." Something like relief crossed his features before he nodded and turned back to the path. They worked together, clearing snow from critical equipment. Talia, determined to prove her recovery and usefulness, pushed herself harder than she should have. While attempting to dislodge ice from a satellite dish, she lost her footing on the slippery surface. Ethan's reaction was instantaneous. He lunged forward, catching her before she hit the ground, pulling her against his chest with surprising force. "I told you to be careful," he said, his voice harsh with what she now recognized was not anger, but fear. His arms remained around her, holding her steady. "I'm not fragile," Talia insisted, though she made no move to pull away. His warmth was intoxicating, seeping through layers of clothing. "No," he agreed, his expression softening as he looked down at her. "You're the strongest person I've met. But this planet doesn't care about strength." They stood there, the moment suspended between them. Talia was acutely aware of his heartbeat, rapid and strong, matching the acceleration of her own. Her diplomatic training had covered cross-species interactions extensively, but nothing had prepared her for this. The overwhelming urge to close the remaining distance between them. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice unsteady. "I find myself experiencing responses that are not within standard diplomatic parameters." A smile, rare and transformative, crossed his face. "Is that cerulean for attraction?" "Yes," she admitted, abandoning protocol entirely. "And you?" Instead of answering with words, Ethan lowered his head slowly, giving her time to withdraw. When she didn't, his lips met hers, gentle, questioning. The physical differences between their species became apparent in the kiss. Her skin cooler, his breath warmer. But these variations only heightened the sensation. Talia's hands moved to his shoulders, steadying herself as unfamiliar but pleasant sensations cascaded through her body. When they separated, both were breathing heavily, creating mingled clouds in the cold air. "We should return to the cabin," Ethan said, his voice deeper than usual. Inside, with the door secured against the cold, the tension between them crystallized into something palpable. Talia removed her outer layers slowly, aware of Ethan's eyes following her movements. "On cerulean," she said, breaking the loaded silence, "intimacy is preceded by formal declarations of intent and compatibility." Ethan stepped closer. "And on Earth, sometimes it's preceded by months of tension and one near accident in the snow. Our diplomatic manuals failed to mention that approach," she said, a smile touching her lips. "What would your diplomatic approach suggest now?" he asked, his fingers brushing a strand of her silver-blue hair from her face. "That we negotiate terms agreeable to both parties," she replied, leaning into his touch. "I propose the following terms," Ethan said, his hand gently cupping her face. "That whatever happens between us happens because we both desire it, not from obligation or gratitude or loneliness." "Counter-proposal," Talia whispered, moving closer. "That we acknowledge all those factors may exist alongside something more significant that neither of us expected to find. Their second kiss was different, deeper, more certain." Talia's diplomatic reserve dissolved completely as Ethan's arms encircled her. They moved toward his bed with unspoken agreement, each item of clothing removed, becoming a further commitment to their new understanding. In the dim light of the cabin, their physical differences became a landscape to explore rather than a barrier. Ethan's fingers traced the iridescent patterns on her shoulders and back that marked her as cerulean royalty, while she mapped the scars that told the story of his military past. "Is this—" he began, hesitating as their bodies pressed together. "Yes," she assured him, pulling him closer. "Our anatomies are compatible, diplomatically speaking." He laughed then, the sound vibrating against her skin, before kissing her deeply and proceeding to demonstrate just how compatible they truly were. Their joining transcended physical pleasure, becoming a bridge between worlds, each touch an unspoken promise, each shared breath a new treaty being written between them. What had begun as a desperate bargain at his doorstep had transformed into something freely given, joyfully received. Afterward, as they lay intertwined beneath the firs, Talia realized that for the first time since the crash, she felt not just warm, but truly alive. The communication array crackled to life, startling them both. Ethan had spent weeks modifying it to Talia's specifications, but neither had expected success so soon. "Signal detected," announced the automated system. "Cerulean diplomatic frequency. Identified." Talia froze, her hands suspended over the vegetables she'd been preparing for their meal. Across the cabin, Ethan's expression remained carefully neutral, though she'd learned to read the tension in his shoulders. "You should respond," he said finally, turning back to the weapons he was cleaning, a task she'd noticed he performed when anxious. "They've been searching for you." Talia approached the console slowly. 2 months had passed since her crash, 2 months that had transformed her from a disgraced diplomat into something else entirely. Someone else. Her finger hovered over the response button. "If I establish contact, a retrieval mission would be dispatched." "I know." Ethan's voice was even, betraying nothing. The unspoken question hung between them. What happens then? She pressed the button. "This is Ambassador Talia Nix of the Cerulean Diplomatic Corps, transmitting survival confirmation." The response was immediate. Her government had not abandoned her. A rescue vessel could reach her coordinates within 14 days. They requested status updates and coordinates. Ethan continued his work in silence as she completed the transmission. When she finally turned off the console, the cabin seemed unnaturally quiet. 14 days, she said softly. Ethan nodded, still not looking at her. "You'll be home soon." "Home," Talia repeated, the word suddenly foreign on her tongue. She moved toward him, gently taking the weapon from his hands and setting it aside. "Ethan, look at me." When he did, the conflict in his eyes mirrored her own. "You have a life to return to," he said. "Responsibilities, a position." "A position I lost before the crash," she reminded him. "And what life would I return to? Diplomatic isolation, political disgrace, better than physical isolation on a frozen rock with a broken soldier." Talia placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat. "Is that how you see yourself? How you see us?" Over the weeks, they had created something neither had anticipated. A shared language of touch and trust, of quiet mornings and passionate nights. They'd mapped each other's bodies and souls with equal care. What had begun as desperate survival had blossomed into something neither was prepared to name. "I've received an official communication," she said carefully. "My government has offered reinstatement. The political landscape has shifted. My approach to the Varan situation has been vindicated." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Congratulations." "I haven't accepted." His eyes snapped to hers. "Why not? It's everything you worked for." "Not everything." She moved closer, her body fitting against his with familiar ease. "The crash changed me, Ethan. Or perhaps it revealed what was always there beneath diplomatic protocol and political ambition." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I have a choice to make. Return to a life that no longer fits, or—" She hesitated, diplomat's caution warring with newfound courage. "Or build something new, with you." Ethan pulled back slightly, searching her face. "You'd stay here? You'd freeze 8 months of the year, live in isolation? I'd be with you," she interrupted. Unless you want me to go." The silence stretched between them, loaded with possibility. Then Ethan's expression changed, hope breaking through like sunrise after the longest night. "I've received a communication too," he admitted. "Earth Coalition, offering reinstatement, mission choice. I declined years ago when they first offered. And now I'm considering it." His hands found her waist, drawing her closer. "There are outposts on warmer planets, research stations, places where a military security officer and a xeno-diplomatic consultant might both find purpose." Talia's pulse quickened. "You'd leave this place, for me?" "For us," he corrected, "if that's what you want." She answered him with a kiss, pouring into it all the words that her diplomatic training hadn't equipped her to say. That night, their lovemaking carried a new intensity, celebration and promise intertwined. Ethan whispered her name against her skin like a prayer, while Talia's hands memorized every contour of his body as if committing him to memory. When morning came, they drafted 2 messages together. Talia's to the Cerulean Diplomatic Corps, respectfully declining reinstatement and requesting independent contractor status. Ethan's to Earth Coalition, accepting their long-standing offer with specific conditions regarding posting and partnership accommodations. As the messages transmitted, Talia stood at the window, watching the twin suns of this world rise over the ice fields. Ethan joined her, his arm encircling her waist. "I never expected this," she admitted. "When my ship was falling, I thought my story was ending. Instead, it was just beginning," Ethan said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Our story." Outside, the ice gleamed like scattered stars across the frozen landscape, beautiful and harsh, just like the journey that had brought them together. What had begun with a desperate bargain at his doorstep had transformed into something neither had dared imagine, a bridge between worlds, built not through formal treaties, but through 2 hearts finding home in each other's arms.